I'm not trying to be clever. I'm just trying to ask you to explain
your words.
You're
always trying
to
be clever on this programme. I listen to you sometimes. I've given up listening that much. But
let me try one more time.
I'm sorry.
One more time. What is the evidence that Britain, in your words, is hurtling towards becoming an Islamic country?
This is where the interview gets interesting, because there are really two arguments happening at once. One is about what Lowe believes is happening to Britain. The other is about whether the evidence actually gets you to that conclusion. And once those two things are separated, you can see why the same question keeps coming back. Because the answer isn't as straightforward as the original claim.
What is the evidence that, in your words, we are, quote, hurtling towards being an Islamic country?
Let me ask you, Nick, have you read our 219-page rape gang inquiry report, which we did? I don't think the BBC has covered it at all.
Well, it's covered the rape gangs, but let me ask you to answer the question.
Hang on, have you read that report?
I haven't read the whole report, no, but what's the evidence for
Why
your
not?
claim?
Why not, Nick? That is a very important part of what we're talking about today.
Okay. Let's come to that.
What we're seeing is the gradual Islamification of Britain.
What's the evidence for that?
Or the silent jihad, if you like. And people like the BBC, our national monopoly, which, as you know, I would defund responsibly very quickly should I acquire power. The point is, you have been complicit in watching this gradual spread of the Islamicization of Britain.
There's a subtle problem with arguments like this. Several things can be true at the same time without one automatically proving the other. The existence of a serious social problem doesn't by itself establish a much broader theory about the future of an entire country.
What I asked you for was the evidence.
And the rape
the evidence that we're hurtling towards being an Islamic country.
You didn't cover it once.
What's the evidence for the fact that we're
supposed to inform, educate, and entertain with complete impartiality? We are not doing that.
Well, look, just briefly, Mr. Lowe, because you've raised it a couple of times, but I want us to have an interesting exchange of views.
You asked me the question,
Yeah,
Nick.
no, and I'll briefly give you an answer, which is we covered rape gangs in detail. We covered the national inquiry. You're talking about us covering your individual report. Let me ask you again, because I'm asking about your words, so forgive me, I'm not trying to be clever. I'm just trying to ask you to explain your words.
You're always trying to be clever on this programme. I listen to you sometimes. I've given up listening that much. But
let me try one more time.
I'm sorry.
One more time. What is the evidence that Britain, in your words, is hurtling towards becoming an Islamic country?
It's quite plain for everybody to see when you see very large parts of the country who are running a parallel system. And you are seeing, as a result of that, as I said to you just now, the manifestation of Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. Most of these people are Pakistani Muslims, most of them from one part of Pakistan, Mirpur. And if you had the intellectual appetite to actually read the report.
And this is where the burden of proof becomes important. If the conclusion is much bigger than the evidence being presented, adding more examples doesn't necessarily solve the problem. What matters is the connection between them. And that's the part being tested here.
What you say is a prediction that white Britons will be a minority in 2063. Are you aware that by the definitions used in that particular report, King Charles is not a white Briton? Do you think he is a white Briton?
Well, many people have different interpretations of that, Nick. I mean, we can split hairs, but I think...
Well, you're not splitting hairs. Do you think the monarch of this country is a white Briton?
It's quite clear, and I think most British people, if you speak to them, would agree. And that is why
King Charles a
Restore
white
Britain's
Briton?
Membership is growing very fast, and your listeners are dropping equally fast because you don't reflect actually what's happening.
Why don't you answer the question now we've got you on?
You try and whitewash all of the things that are...
The King Charles example is clever because it takes an abstract demographic argument and gives it a very simple test. If a definition produces an unexpected result when applied to someone everyone recognizes, then the definition itself deserves more attention than the headline prediction.
Is King Charles a white Briton, Rupert Lowe?
You peddle DEI, you peddle all of the malign agenda.
Okay.
which British people have got bored of.
Right.
So
they're
you're
bored of
opening yourself
people
up.
ignoring the questions, Mr. Lowe. The reason I ask you, and it's a serious
I'm not ignoring
question.
any questions. It is a fact that by 2063, white British people will be a minority on current trends. I don't think anyone disputes that.
What I was putting to you is that the basis of that forecast, which is widely disputed and based on a whole series of assumptions that none of us know whether they'll be true or not, is that you're only called a white Briton if both of your parents were born in this country. So because Prince Philip was born in Greece, King Charles is not, under your definition, treated as a white Britain. Now, let me go on and ask you a different question. In the recent election, the by-election,
I did come on to speak about ostensibly the economic paper we've just put out and about the issue with Nigel Farage. And
I'm going to come to Nigel Farage.
You've managed to turn it into a discussion about British people becoming a minority, white British people by 2063. So look,
it's very
please move on to another question.
I thought it was a courtesy to you because it's something you care passionately about.
And notice how quickly the discussion moves from a narrow question to a much wider political argument. That can be useful rhetorically because it gives you more ground to stand on, but it can also make the original question harder to answer rather than easier.
You referred in a recent tweet to British areas in Manchester and you compared them with more Muslim areas. Are you saying that Muslims in Manchester are not British?
I don't think a lot of the Muslims in Manchester are integrating into British culture.
Are they British?
And if you go to Curry Mile, where I was the other day while I was campaigning with Marlon West, who did extremely well in the mayoral election there, you see entire communities who basically are pursuing their own culture, their own religion, and their own agenda.
Are they British?
Now, successful immigration involves accepting the faith and the structures that exist within the countries you go and settle in. And if you go and live in Saudi Arabia, you go and live in Dubai, you have to accept the prevailing culture there. Otherwise, you're not welcome.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone would disagree that large parts of Britain are becoming unrecognizable when it comes to the way they used to be, even 30, 40 or 50 years ago.
Okay. This is where two different ideas start getting mixed together. Integration is about how people participate in society. British identity is a much broader question. If one becomes the test for the other, the argument quietly changes without anyone explicitly saying so.
Talk about that then. In the past, you've accused Nigel Farage of being, and I quote, a viper who is leading a cult, a narcissist who thinks he's the Messiah, and you've said that he's totally unfit to lead the country. Are you surprised that he didn't take your offer of cooperation entirely seriously?
Well, look, let's not go into the history. I mean, Nigel, Zia Yusuf, Lee Anderson, for some extraordinary reason, they made false witness statements to the police, tried to have me in prison for nothing, and booted me out of the party for equally nothing. I thought I was actually doing quite a good job promoting reform, asking lots of questions in Parliament. I think I'm one of the most active MPs in Parliament since I've been elected. And I'm now doing the same on the Public Accounts Committee, which holds the civil service, the extremely deficient, overstaffed, overpaid civil service to account.
But are you serious about cooperation?
People can watch that on Hansard.
Are you serious about cooperation was the question.
So look, Nigel decided with his acolytes that I was not part of his party, so he kicked me out. And once I cleared my name, which was obviously going to happen because I am what I appear to be, an honest, tax-paying person who owns businesses and I think has played my part in driving the economy, having worked in the city for 20 years and now running a number of private businesses which I control.
The Farage section introduces a different kind of contradiction. You can genuinely want cooperation while still believing someone treated you badly. But the stronger the personal accusations have been, the harder it becomes to explain why that history should suddenly stop mattering.
I think I've played a big part in what Reform did in Parliament until they kicked me out for some extraordinary reason. You have to ask them about that.
But just briefly, if you would, because we're short of time, will you cooperate with it? Will you cooperate with it?
When I was asked to be on the Public Accounts Committee, the reason I set up Restore as a movement to start with was to unite. And I don't even call it right-wing thought. I call it common sense thought. What's happened is your monopoly, the national monopoly, the BBC, which has become the line in my view, has gone so far left that anyone who speaks common sense appears to be far right in your terms. Well, I'm not far right. I am a normal punter, okay? And I want my country back. I don't want all of the piffle and the rubbish that you lot peddle. I want a country that works, is at peace with itself, and is founded upon the Christian principles which have served us extremely well for many thousands of years.
You're a man,
So look,
aren't you, in reality, Mr. Lowe? You're a man with money and a grudge and a social media account who airs his prejudices on X and gets hearing because you got the backing of Elon Musk.
I made an effort on Friday to reach out to Nigel Farage, genuinely, honestly, and in good faith, to try and find a way, despite the fact that I think they treated me despicably badly and arguably illegally. But I tried to put that behind us in order to unite common sense thought. Because there are many things we agree on. There are equally many things we don't agree on.
Okay.
So I put the red lines in there and I made a genuine effort. Now, so far, I had one message from Nigel on Sunday morning at 10:30 saying, we'll call later. Now, in his press conference, he said he was waiting for a call from me. Well, I think most people...
Forgive me, Mr. Lowe, we haven't got time for every detail of your relationship with Nigel Farage.
What makes this exchange worth watching is the difference between a political belief and a political argument. Lowe clearly has a strong view of where Britain has gone wrong. He sees changes in immigration, culture, religion and public institutions as part of a much larger transformation. That's a coherent political worldview. But a worldview isn't the same thing as proof, and the presenter spends most of the interview testing that distinction. The biggest example is the phrase hurtling towards an Islamic country. That's an enormous conclusion. To establish it, you would need more than evidence that Britain has Muslim communities, more than evidence of serious crimes involving some offenders, and more than evidence that particular communities may be poorly integrated. You need to show how those facts actually lead to the conclusion being made. That's where the argument becomes vulnerable. Then the conversation moves to the demographic prediction about white British people becoming a minority. Again, the interesting question isn't simply whether a particular number has been predicted, it's how that prediction is constructed. What counts as white British? What assumptions are being made? And would the same definition produce results that seem counterintuitive when applied to well-known individuals? That's why the King Charles moment matters. The presenter isn't really interested in the king as an individual. He's testing whether the category being used is as straightforward as Lowe's argument makes it sound. The Manchester exchange raises another issue. Cultural integration and British identity overlap, but they're not identical. If someone speaks another language, follows another religion, or maintains a different cultural tradition, that doesn't automatically answer whether they belong to Britain. Once again, the definition matters, and then there is Farage. Here, the disagreement becomes less about evidence and more about trust. Lowe wants to put past grievances aside because there are political objectives he believes are more important. But the presenter reminds him that those grievances were not minor disagreements, they were deeply personal accusations. So the question isn't simply whether they share common ground, it's whether that common ground is strong enough to overcome the history between them. Across all these sections, the same pattern keeps appearing. Broad claims are easy to make. They're much harder to defend when someone starts asking precise questions. And that's probably the most revealing part of this interview. The presenter doesn't need to disprove every element of Lowe's worldview. He only needs to identify the points where the reasoning jumps too quickly from evidence to conclusion, or where one definition quietly becomes another. Whether you agree with Lowe politically or not, that's a standard any serious political argument should face. If a claim is strong, it should survive a precise question. If a prediction depends on a definition, that definition should survive scrutiny. And if two people want to cooperate after a bitter dispute, there has to be a convincing explanation for how the past is being put aside. That is where this interview leaves the audience, not with one simple winner, but with several questions that become much harder to avoid once the rhetoric is stripped away. So what do you think? Did the presenter genuinely expose weaknesses in Lowe's argument, or did he spend too much time picking apart definitions? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoy this kind of political breakdown, like the video, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next debate.